Welcome to the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Our mission is to help executives become better cyber risk managers. We are your hosts. I'm Kip Boyle, CEO of Cyber Risk Opportunities.
And I'm Jake Bernstein, Cybersecurity Counsel at the law firm of Newman DuWors.
And this is the show where we help you become a better cyber risk manager.
The show is sponsored by Cyber Risk Opportunities and Newman DuWors LLP. If you have questions about your cybersecurity related legal responsibilities,
and if you want to manage your cyber risks just as thoughtfully as you manage risks in other areas of your business, such as sales, accounts receivable, and order fulfillment, then you should become a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program, which you can do for a fraction of the cost of hiring a single cybersecurity expert. You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com.
So, Kip, what are we going to talk about today?
All right, Jake, today we're going to talk about whether you should pay a ransomware attacker to get control of your data and systems back.
Well, that raises the very first question, Kip, which is, what is ransomware?
All right, ransomware is a type of malware, and malware, in case you didn't know, is a shortened version of malicious software. And so what ransomware does when it gets on your system is it prevents you, or it limits you from either accessing your system or your data. So it'll lock your screen, or it'll actually scramble your files so that you can see them. You can see that they're there, but they're absolutely unavailable to you. And you can't get your data back unless you pay a ransom to the person who attacked you. And the ransom is typically paid in Bitcoin, Ethereum, or some other cryptocurrency, which allows for anonymous payments.
Well, that doesn't sound very fair. Where did ransomware come from?
You know, ransomware seems like the latest thing, but actually the first known case of ransomware goes back to 1989. And so it was called the AIDS Trojan. It's a really interesting story. You can go on the internet and read more about it. But what happened is you would get this on your computer system, and back then this was something that attacked DOS operating systems. So if any of you listening have never touched a DOS machine before, feel lucky. But what happened was this thing would get on your computer, and then it would lock you out of your files, and then it would display a message saying that in order to get your files back, you had to send $189 to a place called PC Cyborg Corporation, and they gave you an address of a post office box in Panama, Central America. Can you believe that? 1989.
Shocking.
Yes, you sound shocked.
Very shocked.
So that's kind of where it came from, but of course we're all hearing about it now because in 2013, what happened is that the modern encryption algorithms and Bitcoin were combined, and there was just an explosion of these kinds of attacks. So, and just to give you some quick examples, so there's a ransomware called Crypto Locker, and it's stolen about $27 million altogether from people that it's infected. There's another one called Crypto Wall, and it's stolen about 18 million. And by the way, the reason we know how much they've stolen is because we can look at the addresses of the Bitcoin wallets, and we can see how many payments are going into them, even though we don't know who owns those wallets. And then in 2017, so just last year, there were a couple of really notorious ransomware strikes, one called WannaCry and one called NotPetya. And interestingly enough, NotPetya really didn't generate a lot of money for its authors, but it caused about $1 billion worth of damage. These things are very opportunistic. They mostly prey on people who are on the internet with outdated web browsers and browser plugins like Java, Flash, and Adobe Reader. So now, Jake, as an attorney, you kind of followed this stuff pretty closely, at least, you know, kind of how ransomware affects companies. Can you tell us about a time when someone actually paid a ransomware?
I sure can, Kip, but I think one question before I answer that one is, why can't I just unencrypt my files? Why should I even have to worry about paying?
Right. Well, okay. So in order to unencrypt your files, you need what's called a private key. And that's kind of the secret sauce for how this thing works. So once your files are encrypted, your private key is in the hands of the person who attacked you. And so the idea is you've got to pay them in order to get that private key back. But the great news is that if you've got a really good data backup system and you get attacked, this becomes nothing more than a speed bump in your life, because you can wipe your computer clean and you can then reinstall your operating system and your applications and then restore from backup. And obviously it's not going to be any fun to do that, but you won't have to pay the ransom.
Well, and yet we see people paying the ransom. One example is on February 5th, 2016, so just about 2 years ago now, the Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center was attacked, and they were effectively out of business for 5 days.
Yeah, it was well covered in the press.
It was. What we can presume is that they must not have had any effective data backup system, because they did ultimately pay a $17,000 ransom.
Mm-hmm.
They were forced to use pen and paper for record keeping, something I know that more and more hospitals are practicing again, simply because of this problem. And they couldn't serve most of their patients and lost, I'm sure, several $1 million in revenue.
Yeah, so I guess that's really the issue, right? So if you're the chief hospital administrator and you have a choice between continuing to lose millions of dollars of revenue and turning patients away, or paying a $17,000 ransom, um, I guess in some ways the choice may seem obvious.
Well, I think if you're looking at it as a business decision, and that's what we can talk more about that. I think it could seem obvious. Now, one thing I just wanted the listeners to understand is that we're going to be talking about multiple medical center ransomware attacks on today's show, and it's important to understand that the ransomware isn't hitting life-saving equipment at this point. It hasn't happened yet, to my knowledge. This is much more about attacking the business side of the hospital. I think that I just want people to understand that we're not. It hasn't happened yet. We're not really talking about what you might do if someone decides to take offline your respirators and your blood transfusion machines. That
Right.
really would be a totally different set of circumstances that I think would have many different sets of thinking. Different thinking would go into how you respond to that.
Oh, absolutely, and in fact, it's another whole series of podcasts we could do, right, on the vulnerability of medical devices and medical equipment, life-saving and treating equipment, gamma knives and IV pumps, implanted defibrillators. There's quite a bit at risk there, but yeah. So what we're really talking about is like scheduling systems and administrative systems.
Right.
Okay, so 2 years ago they were hit, but things move fast on the internet. Are people still paying ransomware?
Yes, they are. In fact, less than a month ago, actually this month, the Hancock Regional Medical Center on January 11th was attacked, and this was covered in the press as well. And their CEO, Steve Long, said some interesting things in the press about this. Essentially, that the affected files were backed up and they could have been recovered, but restoring them would have taken days, possibly weeks, and it would have cost a bunch of money. And as we just talked about, from a business standpoint, paying the small ransom, which in this instance was $55,000. So we're going to call that small, but note that it is more than double, almost triple actually, what the ransom was in 2016.
Right.
And what Mr. Long said, and this is a direct quote, "These folks have an interesting business model. They make it just easy enough to pay the ransom. They price it right." And I think that is goes directly to your point about a hospital administrator might be thinking of this as a business decision.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads to I think the next question, which is, Kip, does anyone refuse to pay?
Well, yes, we do have some cases where people are refusing to pay, and again, just continuing to talk about medical centers, and one of the reasons, by the way, that we're talking a lot about medical centers is they get a lot of coverage when this happens to them. It's a very high visibility event when a medical center stops functioning, but I don't see any reason why our conversation wouldn't apply to any other form of business or organization. uh, the Methodist Hospital in Henderson, Kentucky. They were attacked a couple of years ago, March of 2016, and very similar to the Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center in the sense that they were out of business for about 5 days, and they had to return to pen and paper record keeping, which, by the way, the cost of once the crisis is over with and they're back in business, somebody has to take those paper records and digitize them. So there's another expense that really isn't even talked about in terms of the recovery process. But so Methodist Hospital, Henderson, Kentucky, they had pretty much the same profile as Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center. Um, their ransom was actually even 10 times less. $1,600 was all that was being demanded of them, but they dug in and refused to do it. And the reason why is because they had effective data backup systems and other recovery systems before they were ever attacked. And so I kind of think of it as like, you know, uh, in judo or karate, and forgive me, I'm not a martial arts expert, but I see this where somebody's attacking you, and you essentially step out of the way, grab them, and just kind of use their momentum to you know. Uh, let them go right by you, and that's essentially what happened here at Methodist Hospital. But but there are other cases that we could talk about where they didn't have effective data backup and recovery ready to go, and they just ended up grinding it out. And on principle, they would not pay that ransom.
Well, let me ask you this. The Methodist Hospital here, they had data recovery, they had disaster recovery backup systems. Would it ever be wise to pay a ransom and then, just trust that your files were back to normal? It seems to me that once someone has infiltrated your information systems, encrypted your files, that you probably should restore from backup even if you did pay. So why are some people paying?
Gosh, again, the theme of reducing this down to a business decision. Do I do A or B? Which one costs the least? Which is quickest and easiest to get me where I want to be? That's where a lot of this is I think being driven from why people are paying. It's just less time consuming, and it kind of fits the paradigm of, do I buy tongue depressors from supplier A or supplier B? They're all pretty much the same, so I'll just go with the least cost alternative. And what's overlooked is things like what you're talking about, which is we don't know when somebody attacks our data what they've really done to it. So if we buy it back from them, how do we know that they didn't change it before they gave it back to us?
Well, you have no idea, and
Right.
that's kind of my point. Is that if you're paying a ransom and you're expecting your data to be given back to you just as it was, I mean, look, these people are crooks, right? Even if they intend to give it back to you, there's no real reason to think that they're going to be able to decrypt everything and give it back to you just as it was before, as if they'd never happened. I
Right.
don't think that you can I don't think you can reasonably trust ransomware affected data that you've paid to unlock.
Yeah.
I just think you have to restore from backup no matter what. So why pay ever? I mean,
You know, yeah, and especially in a medical situation, because, let's say my billing records, for example, if I get them back and they're not correct, and I go ahead and submit reimbursement requests to insurance companies on the basis of data that actually turns out to be incorrect, that can come back and bite me later on. If there was some kind of an audit, I might have requested a reimbursement for far in excess of what I actually, the cost that I actually incurred. Or a patient's record or their dosing, the quantities of medicines they should have. I mean, there's a lot at risk here.
yeah, No, I think that's true.
And also, by the way, there's another angle to this as well. So not only is there a data integrity issue, but how do we know that when we get our data encrypted, that the thieves, the attackers, aren't also making a copy for themselves?
I, you don't know, and there's really no guarantees here at all. I think that if you've been the victim of if you've been the victim of a ransomware attack, you kind of have to assume that you need to restore from backup and that you might need to notify people of a breach. And in fact, Kip, under HIPAA, the current thinking and enforcement has been that if a medical company or anyone with personal health information is affected by ransomware, that is actually considered a loss of control of the data
Hmm.
and is itself a violation of HIPAA.
I thought I had heard that.
Yep.
And I'm sure that to the management teams in medical centers, this probably seems completely overdone, right? Hysterical even. The idea that that a ransomware attack is actually a data breach, because for all you can tell from what you can see, the data is still right where you left it. You just can't get to it. Um, but the truth of the matter is that you have to think beyond what you can actually see. And if I were the kind of person who would attack and encrypt people's data, why wouldn't I take a copy and sell it? Because private health information is worth a lot more in the black market than credit cards are. So for the effort that I put into attacking you and getting you to pay me a ransom, I can turn around and take that very same data and earn extra money for no additional effort.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think so. I mean, if we analyze these reasons, and even if they sound okay, I think it's pretty clear that they're not, right?
Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and flip the script, right? So these are all we've been talking about all the reasons why it may make sense in the moment, especially when you're terrified and nothing's working to pay the ransom. But let's go ahead and flip the script and talk about uh, why it wouldn't be a good idea, right? We've already touched on a few sort of nibble around the edge ideas, but Jake, give us some hard hitting ideas for why we shouldn't be doing it.
Well, one thing that I tell clients who get what I would say shaken down under in litigation is that there's a tension. If you pay once, guess what? You're a great target to come back to again. So
Hmm.
right off the bat, if you negotiate with these people and you pay the ransom, um, not only do you continue the business model and make it viable for them to continue doing this to other people, but let's be honest, they're coming back for you as well.
Yeah, these days there's organized crime on the internet is really sort of like Al Capone, and gets a high speed bandwidth connection to his house, right? I mean, these are bullies at the end of the day, right? And they want your milk money. And just like in middle school or in elementary school, if the bully's waiting for you and takes your milk money, or you give it to them one day, you can be sure they'll be there tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, and they want your milk money, and they're just going to keep coming for it. I mean, this is really the same thing you're talking about, isn't it?
Well, it's close. I think it's actually even worse because where does this money actually go?
Right, let's talk about that. So I'm paying Bitcoin and I get my files back, and I have no idea because of the anonymity of cryptocurrency. I don't really know where it's going, but what do we think's happening? Where do we think it's going?
Oh, I think you end up funding terrorism,
Hmm.
which is a real problem. This you're very likely to fund organized criminal groups in countries that are hostile to the Western world. Um, we know for a fact that a lot of these ransomware attacks come out of Russia, China, and they come uh, because of the democratization that the internet offers for kind of force multiplication. Small countries who couldn't, who can't possibly compete with larger nations in a classical military sense, are absolutely able to cause just as much havoc online with cyber warfare.
Right.
And so these are also going to small dictatorships, um, fundamentalist terrorist Islamic groups. I mean, they're going to places that we probably don't want to fund. And I think, there's no way to prove that. That's kind of the definition of Bitcoin and anonymous cryptocurrencies. But if you think about it, you think about where it's likely going, I think that needs to be another aspect of the quote business decision.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just paying some, kid down the street who thought he was real clever, to give you your files back. You're honestly probably funding people you don't want to fund.
Yeah, you're giving money to Tony Soprano. I mean, these are not good people, and to the extent that we don't have a lot of evidence on them, one thing that we've been hearing a lot about in the press is North Korea is being blamed by the U.S. government in a string of attacks, and the motivation for them is really quite simple. We've put a set of lockdown, of controls on North Korea. We've isolated them economically, and they've got to find some way to fund their nuclear program. And it sure seems like these ransomware attacks and other attacks to convert data into money is being perpetrated by them.
Agreed. I think that's. I think the bottom line here is that paying a ransom simply encourages more criminal behavior. It's bad for our online community. And once again, just to reiterate it, you never know if the attackers are going to keep their promises, and you don't know if they're actually gone from your computers or if your data is even the same as it was.
Yeah. So when the CEO at Hancock, when I read that article and I saw that he paid a $55,000 ransom payment, I thought, well, there's 55,000 votes for more attacks. And it's, I really think about it as being unethical to pay a ransom with no thought given to the effect that it has on the larger community. I hope that these folks who pay the ransoms don't get hit again, but there's just no way to know. Well, any last thoughts on paying ransomware, Jake?
No, I think that as you move away from the medical industry, the possible reasons for paying just continue to diminish. I think that as we've said, these have not been attacks on life-saving equipment. I don't want to imply that you should never pay the ransom if you're talking about life or death. That's obviously a different question. Hopefully, it won't come to that. But with respect to non-medical industries, back up your systems and don't encourage this behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though it's probably going to get worse before it gets better, we're encouraging our listeners is to not to become part of the problem. Well, thanks for joining us today on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Today we talked about whether you should pay a ransomware attacker to get control of your data and systems back. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast.
Remember that cyber risk management is a team sport and needs to incorporate management, your legal department, HR, and IT for full effectiveness.
And management's goal should be to create an environment where practicing good cyber hygiene is supported and encouraged by every employee. So if you want to manage your cyber risks and ensure that your company enjoys the benefits of good cyber hygiene, then please contact us and consider becoming a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program.
You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.